exactly is. I can show it to you in this book. I believe you, said Marilyn encouragingly. But that isn't the end of it, miss. The words rushed out. They shot arrows at her, only the arrows stuck in the bones, and she was saved by the Texas Rangers. Before Mrs. Simmons could draw a bead on him, he snatched the letters from her hand and scuttled out of the door. Mrs. Simmons traversed her sights on to Marilyn. Miss Frances, I know you're only a temp, and you won't be here with us very long, but you really should know better. The door swung half open, and Gary's grinning face appeared in the gap. If they'd caught you, miss, the Comanches, you wouldn't have stood a chance. He delivered his punchline. Don't be cheeky. Mrs. Simmons' anger bounced off the closing door. She turned her back to Marilyn. There, that's exactly what I mean, if you give the dirty little beast a chance, but you positively encourage him. Marilyn examined her Glory Rose nail polish critically. That was also exactly true, thought Frances, making a mental note to uproot any roses in her garden at home which might ever remind her of this particular shade of red. And, looking down past her nails to what Gary had tried to see, Marilyn certainly wouldn't have stood a chance with the Comanches either. That was also true. Marilyn shrugged. He's harmless. Nothing in trousers is harmless. Mrs. Simmons caught her tongue as she stared at Marilyn, and Frances knew what she was thinking. That anything in trousers was as much target for tonight to Marilyn Frances as Marilyn Frances was for anything in trousers. Well, that was the trick. Since there was no time for a more unobtrusive approach, in order not to be seen, she had to be obvious. And there was nothing more unimaginably obvious than the pink, red, blonde, brazen, and braless Marilyn, with her eyes on all men from 16 to 60. It's all very well for you, Mrs. Simmons began bitterly, and then brightened. You won't be here very long. Oh, I don't know about that. Frances toyed with the idea of touching up Marilyn's lipstick. The trouble was it would mean looking at her face, and that was not something she particularly enjoyed. I quite like it here. Mrs. Simmons bristled. Mr. Cavendish's proper secretary. There was a heavy emphasis on the adjective. Will be back from hospital in a fortnight. There are other jobs that come up. Girls are always leaving, as I should know. And I'm a bit cheesed off with this temping. I think it's time to dig in somewhere comfy, like here. The time was just about right to plant the shape of things to come, anyway. I hear there's a secretary leaving in research and development. She winked at Mrs. Simmons, where all those groovy scientists are. Mrs. Simmons regarded her incredulously. You're joking. Marilyn gazed into space. Some of them are quite young. There's one that's got a smashing sports car. I've seen him in the canteen. And he's seen me, too. That was true. She'd made sure of that. And groovy Dr. Garfield also worked right alongside ungroovy Dr. Harrison, who just might be selling out British Americans' research and development to the other side. What was more? Mrs. Simmons' lips were compressed so tightly that she found it hard to speak. Well, you may not find that so easy. They don't take just anyone in R&D, you know. You have to have a security clearance for a start. Marilyn giggled. No problem, dearie. I'm absolutely secure. And that was also true. With the security officer already primed by the special branch, Marilyn's translation to the rich pastures of R&D was a fait accompli, whatever the opposition. No problem. But that wasn't the reason which Gary would put into circulation. With my qualifications, I can push him over any time. No problem. Marilyn fluttered her false eyelashes and decided to examine her lipstick. What drove Mrs. Simmons beyond words was the knowledge that Marilyn's shorthand and typing speeds, not to mention her actual secretarial qualifications and efficiency,